The sound of steel doors slamming echoes through the cold hallways of Pelican Bay State Prison. It's lunchtime inside one of America's most feared Supermax facilities, and for most inmates, food is not just about survival, it's about power, punishment, and sometimes revenge. Imagine this. A gray metal food tray slides through the narrow slot of a cell door. The tray carries what looks like food but feels more like an insult. Overcooked beans, a lump of mystery meat, and bread so dry it crumbles in your hand. For many inmates, this is the highlight of their day. But for one man, today's meal is about to change everything. An inmate known as Spider, covered in tattoos, stares at his tray with rage. He flips the beans over with his spoon and discovers something unexpected: shards of glass hidden in the mush. His jaw tightens. This wasn't a mistake. Someone wanted him to eat it. Someone wanted him hurt, or dead. He shoves the tray back at the slot and screams for the guard, but by then the damage is done. Word spreads fast across the cell block. Food inside Pelican Bay is no longer safe. This is the world behind bars, where a meal can mean life, death, or domination. But how did food become a weapon inside one of America's toughest prisons? To understand that, we need to go back to where it all begins. The daily ritual of eating behind bars in Pelican Bay. The day starts early. Breakfast is served before the sun rises. Oatmeal so watery it looks like soup, powdered milk, and a piece of fruit, usually a bruised orange. Some inmates eat quietly. Others trade their fruit for a pack of instant noodles, currency that's worth more than cash inside these walls. Not everyone complains though. For the men locked in the SHU, the security housing unit, where solitary confinement rules every hour of the day, food is sometimes the only human contact they get. A guard's hand shoving a tray through the slot can mean the difference between sanity and madness. But here's where the tension builds. Meals are delivered under the watchful eyes of prison gangs. The Mexican Mafia, the Aryan Brotherhood, and the Black Guerrilla family all keep tabs on who eats what, who trades with who, and who refuses a meal. Something as small as giving away your bread could spark suspicion. Was it kindness? Or a secret signal? One inmate once refused his meal 3 days in a row. Rumors spread that he was preparing for a hit, a violent mission ordered by his gang. Guards grew tense, other inmates whispered, and by the 4th day the entire block was on edge. When he finally took his tray, the tension snapped like a wire pulled too tight. And that's when it happened. A fight broke out in the chow hall, loud, violent, and bloody. Food trays became weapons, metal spoons bent into sharp edges, and boiling coffee flung across the room like acid. Guards rushed in swinging batons, pepper spray filled the air, and inmates dropped to the floor coughing, clutching their eyes. The chow hall went from a place of eating to a battlefield in seconds. But the question remains, who planted that glass in Spider's beans? And why? The answer lies deep within the dark politics of food in Pelican Bay. The chow hall had returned to silence, but it wasn't the calm of peace, it was the silence of fear. The fight from earlier still lingered in the air like the bitter stench of pepper spray. Guards had dragged men away in shackles, leaving streaks of blood on the concrete floor. But what no one outside those walls understood was this. In Pelican Bay, food wasn't just fuel. It was a weapon, a bargaining chip, and sometimes, a death sentence. Spider sat in his cell later that night, staring at the wall, his untouched tray still on the floor. The glass shards from his beans had been carefully collected by investigators, but Spider knew better than to trust the system. No one was going to protect him. In Pelican Bay, survival meant watching every bite you put in your mouth because you never knew who wanted to use it against you. Food here was never enough. The portions were small, the taste barely tolerable. Breakfast came before dawn, lunch was rushed, and dinner was cold by the time it reached the cells. Men got used to swallowing hard bread, watered-down oatmeal, and meat patties so mysterious they joked about which animal it came from. But beneath the jokes was anger, and beneath the anger was danger. Because when food became scarce, it became power. Packs of ramen noodles, a spoonful of peanut butter, or a bag of chips could buy loyalty. Or it could buy someone's silence. The gangs inside Pelican Bay controlled the trade. Every bite was accounted for. Spider wasn't part of any gang, but everyone knew you didn't survive long without choosing a side. That's what made him a target. He wasn't paying dues, wasn't following orders, wasn't bowing to anyone. Some men respected that. Others hated it. And one of them had slipped glass into his food. The prison's security housing unit, known as the SHU, was where the real psychological war was fought. Inmates were locked down 23 hours a day alone in cells the size of a bathroom. Meals were slid through a slot. No chow hall, no human contact, just the echo of guards' boots and the scrape of metal trays. Some men survived by turning meals into a ritual, carefully breaking their bread, savoring each bite as if it were their last connection to the outside world. Others broke under the monotony. There were stories whispered of men who went weeks refusing food, convinced it was poisoned. Some smuggled scraps of food in hidden spots in their cells, storing bread under mattresses until it grew moldy, just to feel like they had control. And there were those who snapped, throwing trays back at the doors, smearing food across the walls, their hunger twisted into rage. Spider had seen it all, but now he was caught in it himself. The next morning when breakfast came, lukewarm oatmeal and a bruised apple, he hesitated. He stared at the tray, his hands shaking. Was it safe? He thought about the glass in the beans, and for a moment he considered not eating at all. That's when another voice cut through the silence. From the next cell, an older inmate called out, "You better eat, Spider. If you don't, they already won." It was advice but also a warning. Refusing food in Pelican Bay sent a message, and not always the one you wanted to send. Later that week, tension reached a breaking point. During lunch in the chow hall, two groups of inmates eyed each other from across the room. The Aryan Brotherhood on one side, the Mexican Mafia on the other. No words were spoken. Just hard stares, spoons clutched tight like knives. And then, as fast as it began, the silence broke. A tray flew across the room, striking an inmate in the chest. Chaos erupted. Men lunged at each other, slamming bodies against tables, using plastic forks as weapons. Guards shouted, alarms blared, and pepper spray filled the air again. Spider was shoved against the wall, narrowly avoiding a punch, his eyes stinging from the spray. He coughed, gasped, and watched as one inmate poured scalding coffee straight into another's face. The man screamed, clutching his skin, collapsing to the ground. The guards eventually wrestled control back, dragging men away, their uniforms splattered with food and blood. The chow hall was destroyed, trays scattered like broken shields. And as the last inmate was dragged out, Spider caught sight of something that froze him cold. On the ground, beneath the overturned tables, was another tray of beans. And inside the beans, glittering shards of glass. Spider's blood ran cold. This wasn't random. Someone was sending him a message. Someone wanted him dead, and they were willing to poison the food supply to do it. But who? And why? The discovery of another tray filled with beans and glass spread through the prison like wildfire. In a place where rumors traveled faster than guards could move, whispers carried the story from cell to cell. Some inmates swore it was the work of a rival gang, others believed it was a warning from the guards themselves. No one could be sure. But one thing was certain, eating behind bars had just become more dangerous than ever. Spider lay awake that night on his thin mattress, his stomach aching from the meals he hadn't touched. Hunger gnawed at him, but fear gnawed harder. Who was behind it? Was he being singled out, or was the entire prison about to turn into a battleground over food? He thought about the gangs, the Aryan Brotherhood, the Black Guerrilla Family, the Mexican Mafia. Each had their grip on the prison, each had a hand in the underground trade of ramen noodles, candy bars, and instant coffee. Food was power, and whoever could poison it could control it. The next morning, breakfast was delivered as usual. Oatmeal bread and powdered milk. Spider stared at it, his hands trembling. He picked up the bread, sniffed it, then tore off a small piece and pressed it to his tongue like a man testing for poison. Nothing. He chewed slowly, swallowed, and waited. His heart pounded in his chest. Minutes ticked by. He was still alive. But the paranoia didn't fade. For the rest of the day he watched every tray pass down the line, every spoon lifted to a mouth. He noticed who ate quickly, who traded their bread, who refused their tray altogether. And then he noticed something else. A young inmate across the hall, no more than 20, sliding his tray back untouched. His eyes darted nervously, his body stiff like he was carrying a secret. Spider called out quietly, "Why didn't you eat?" The young inmate looked at him, then shook his head. "Can't talk here." That was all he said. But the message was enough. Someone else knew something. Someone else was afraid. Later that day during recreation time, Spider saw him again in the yard. The young inmate kept his distance, but when the guards turned their heads, he walked close enough to mutter, "They're testing you. If you eat, you're dead." Then he walked away as if nothing happened. Spider's heart sank. Testing him? What? He wasn't in a gang, wasn't trying to take power. Why would anyone want him gone? Unless someone thought he was a threat simply because he refused to bow. That evening, Spider sat alone in his cell, replaying the words in his mind. He knew Pelican Bay's politics well enough to understand one rule: neutrality was dangerous. If you weren't with a gang, you were against them. And someone somewhere had decided to make an example out of him. The following day, chaos returned to the chow hall. It began quietly, a tray slid across the table, a muttered insult. Then came the sound of a chair scraping, a fist slamming down, and suddenly violence erupted. Two inmates lunged at each other, fists flying, trays crashing to the floor. Others joined in, not out of loyalty but out of opportunity. Inmates used whatever they could grab, spoons, trays, even hot coffee, to strike their rivals. Guards stormed in, but this time the fight spread too fast. One inmate leapt onto a table and shouted words Spider couldn't hear. Another smashed a tray against the wall, beans flying like shrapnel. The smell of burning coffee filled the air, mixed with the sound of men coughing and choking as pepper spray filled the room again. Spider ducked under the table, his eyes watering, trying to stay out of the chaos. But then he saw something that made his blood freeze. One of the gang leaders, a man covered in tattoos, pointing straight at him. The message was clear. Spider wasn't just a bystander. He was a target. As guards forced inmates to the ground, Spider was grabbed from behind. A hand clamped around his neck, shoving his face toward the concrete. He struggled, gasped for air, and heard a whisper in his ear, "Don't eat unless we say so." Then just as quickly the grip was gone. The guards dragged his attacker away, shouting orders, while Spider lay on the ground gasping for breath. When the chaos finally ended, the chow hall looked like a war zone. Tables overturned, food smeared across the floor, and inmates dragged out one by one in chains. Spider was left shaken, his mind racing. The gangs weren't just controlling the food, they were controlling who lived and who starved. That night, back in his cell, Spider couldn't shake the voice in his ear. "Don't eat unless we say so." The gangs had turned food into a weapon, and now he was caught in the middle of their war. But what Spider didn't know yet was that the next meal would be more than just dangerous. It would be deadly. Dinner arrived later than usual that night, and the entire block knew something was off. The clang of steel doors echoed longer, the guards moved slower, and the trays seemed heavier. In Pelican Bay, the smallest change could set every inmate on edge. Spider sat on his bunk, waiting, listening to the rattle of wheels as the food cart rolled closer. His stomach growled, but his nerves tightened with every sound. When his tray slid through the slot, he froze. The meal looked ordinary, meat patty, beans, and bread, but Spider had learned long ago that nothing here was ever ordinary. He stared at it for a long time, searching for something out of place. The beans glistened, the bread crumbled, the meat steamed slightly in the cold air. He poked at it with his spoon, waiting, testing. Across the tier, other inmates shouted. Some were joking, others cursing, and a few had already started eating. But Spider didn't move. He remembered the whisper, "Don't eat unless we say so." Then it happened. A loud, choking sound echoed from the far end of the block. Every head turned. An inmate was coughing violently, clutching his throat. He fell to the ground, his tray clattering against the concrete. Guards rushed to him, shouting commands, but it was too late. Foam bubbled from the man's mouth as his body convulsed. Seconds later he went still. The entire block went silent. The only sound was the buzz of the fluorescent lights and the pounding of Spider's heart. Someone had poisoned the food. Guards stormed cell to cell, yanking trays out through the slots, their faces grim. "Lock it down," one of them barked. Inmates shouted, demanding answers, banging fists against steel doors. Some laughed in disbelief, others cursed the system. Spider sat frozen, staring at his untouched tray. Later word spread that the inmate had died from cyanide. No one knew how it got into his food or who had slipped it in. Some blamed the gangs. Others whispered about corrupt guards. In a place like Pelican Bay, the line between rumor and truth blurred until no one could tell the difference. That night, Spider lay awake, the shadows in his cell stretching long and dark. He thought about the man who had just died, and the way his body convulsed on the floor. He thought about the gangs and the quiet power they held over every meal. And he thought about the warning, "Don't eat unless we say so." The next morning, breakfast came as usual, watery oatmeal, powdered milk, and bread. But no one touched it. Inmates stared at their trays, suspicious, waiting. Some threw their meals back out through the slots. Others pressed their food to their noses, sniffing like dogs. Then came the retaliation. In the yard later that day, the gangs made their move. Members of the Aryan Brotherhood surrounded a young Latino inmate, accusing him of poisoning the food. He shouted back, denying everything, but his voice was drowned out by fists. The attack was fast and brutal, blood splattering against the concrete as the guards blew their whistles and rushed in. Spider watched from a distance, his gut twisting. He knew the boy wasn't guilty. He had seen his fear in the chow hall, the way he had avoided eating. The gangs weren't searching for justice. They were sending a message: we decide who eats and we decide who dies. By the time the fight ended, the boy was carried away on a stretcher, his face unrecognizable. The yard fell into silence again, every inmate processing what had just happened. Spider knew then that it wasn't about food at all, it was about control. That evening, Spider's cell door opened unexpectedly. 2 guards ordered him out. Confused, he obeyed, his wrists shackled, his ankles chained. They led him down the long corridor, past rows of cells, past the chow hall, and into a small, windowless room. Inside sat a lieutenant, a man with sharp eyes and a file open in front of him. He motioned for Spider to sit. "You know why you're here," the lieutenant said flatly. Spider shook his head. "I didn't do nothing." The lieutenant leaned forward. "Glass in the beans. Cyanide in the meat. Fights in the chow hall. And somehow your name keeps coming up." Spider's chest tightened. "I didn't touch that food. I didn't poison nobody." The lieutenant studied him for a long moment. Then he closed the file and said, "Maybe not. But somebody wants you gone. And if you don't tell me who, you won't survive another meal in this place." The words hit Spider like a punch. He wasn't just a target anymore, he was the center of something bigger. A game of life and death played out on trays of food. The lieutenant leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You've got one choice, talk or starve." And with that, Spider realized his next meal might not just decide if he lived or died. It might decide if he ever walked out of Pelican Bay alive. Spider sat in that cold, windowless room, the lieutenant's words replaying in his head. Talk or starve. His mouth was dry, his stomach empty, but the hunger was nothing compared to the weight of the decision pressing down on him. In Pelican Bay, talking meant death. Snitching was the fastest way to end up with a shank in your ribs or poison in your meal. But starving? That was a slow death, a torture that could break even the strongest man. The guards escorted him back to his cell, the clank of his chains echoing like a countdown. He sat on the edge of his bunk, staring at the tray still waiting for him: beans, bread, a slice of mystery meat. His stomach begged him to eat. His brain screamed at him not to. He pushed the tray away and lay back, staring at the ceiling, trying to block out the smell of food. The next morning the same thing happened. Breakfast slid through the slot, untouched. By noon his body felt weak, his head dizzy. Hunger sharpened his senses but dulled his judgment. Every sound in the block seemed louder: the slam of a door, the shuffle of feet, the clatter of trays. Spider pressed his fists against his temples. He couldn't go on like this. Then a voice came from the cell next to his. It was the same young inmate who had whispered to him before. "They'll break you, man," the boy said quietly. "Don't let them. You gotta eat something." Spider turned his head toward the wall. "How?" "It's poison. You saw what happened." The boy hesitated, then said, "There's a way. But it'll cost you." That night, after lights out, Spider slipped a note through the crack under his cell door. It was picked up by a runner, an inmate trusted to pass messages for the gangs. The note was short, simple: "I need food I can trust. I'll pay." The price came back quickly: 3 packs of ramen noodles and 2 bags of instant coffee. In Pelican Bay that was a fortune. Spider traded everything he had: his fruit rations, his commissary credits, even a pair of shoes he'd been saving. By the next day he had a small package slid under his door. Inside was a pack of ramen, sealed and safe. He boiled the noodles with hot water from his sink and ate slowly, savoring every bite. It wasn't much, but it kept him alive. For the first time in days he felt his strength returning. But food in prison was never just food. By buying from the underground, Spider had tied himself to the gangs. He was now in their system, owing them favors he couldn't afford to pay back. And in Pelican Bay, debt was deadly. 2 days later, Spider was called to the yard. The sun was pale, the air thick with tension. A group of inmates surrounded him, their faces hard, their tattoos marking allegiance. The leader stepped forward, his arms crossed. "You're eating our food now," the leader said. "That means you belong to us." Spider clenched his jaw. "I didn't ask for protection." The man smirked. "Doesn't matter. You eat you all. And when we say jump, you jump." Spider's heart pounded. He had traded one kind of death for another. The gangs had him in their grip, and refusing them was as dangerous as refusing the poison in his tray. That night he found another package under his door. This time it wasn't food. It was a note written in block letters: "Tomorrow. Chow Hall. You sit where we tell you. Or else." Spider's stomach twisted. He knew exactly what this meant. The gangs weren't just feeding him, they were testing him. They wanted to see if he would bend, if he would obey. The next day the chow hall buzzed with energy. Trays clattered, men shouted, guards watched closely. Spider walked in holding his tray, scanning the room. His usual seat was empty, but across the hall, a table filled with gang members nodded to him. The signal was clear: sit with them or face the consequences. He hesitated, his tray trembling in his hands. Every eye in the room seemed to turn toward him. The guards watched, the inmates whispered, and the gang leader raised his chin, waiting. Spider walked slowly across the room. His heart thundered in his chest, his palms slick with sweat. He sat down at their table, his tray clattering onto the metal surface. The leader smiled. Good. You made the right choice. But Spider knew he had just stepped into a trap. Because in Pelican Bay nothing was free. And the price of survival was about to cost him more than he could imagine. The leader leaned closer, his voice low but sharp. Show everyone you're one of us. Spider looked down at his tray, the same beans, the same bread, the same meat. His stomach growled, his hands shook. He picked up the spoon, lifted it to his mouth and took a bite. The room went quiet. Every inmate watched. Every guard leaned forward. Spider chewed slowly, swallowed, and forced himself to keep breathing. Then the leader grinned. Welcome to the family. But Spider knew this wasn't a welcome. It was a warning. He had taken the first bite, but the next might be his last. The chow hall erupted back into noise as soon as Spider swallowed that first bite. To the guards, it looked like just another inmate eating his tray. But to the men inside Pelican Bay, it was much more than that. Spider had just crossed a line. He wasn't neutral anymore. By sitting at that table and eating under their watch, he was marked, claimed by the gang whether he wanted it or not. Spider sat stiff, the taste of beans heavy in his mouth, his stomach churning with both hunger and dread. Around him, the men laughed, traded jokes, and shoved food into their mouths. To anyone else it might look like camaraderie. But Spider could feel the weight of every stare, the calculation in every word. He was being tested. The leader leaned back, his tattooed arms spread wide. See? Nothing to be afraid of. You eat with us, you live with us. That's how it works. Spider nodded slowly, forcing himself to play along. He knew better than to argue now. The gangs ran the underground economy, controlled the flow of contraband, and even influenced who lived or died in the yard. Refusing them meant open war, and he wasn't ready to die. Still, every bite felt like poison. Every swallow felt like betrayal, to himself, to his vow to stay out of the politics of Pelican Bay. He wanted to scream that he wasn't theirs, that he was just trying to survive. But survival had a cost, and now he owed them. Later that night, back in his cell, the reality set in. He was trapped. If he refused to follow orders, the gangs would kill him. If he obeyed, the guards would see him as a pawn, a gang soldier. Either way, his freedom, what little he had, was gone. The following days proved it. Spider's food was no longer poisoned. His trays arrived untouched, safe. But every meal came with a new demand. Share bread with this man. Trade your fruit with that man. Pass this note under the table. Small tasks, but they weren't about the food. They were about obedience. Each bite tied him tighter to their control. One morning during breakfast, Spider noticed something unusual. An inmate across the hall, an old lifer known as Red, had refused his tray for 3 days straight. His beard was scraggly, his eyes sunken, but his will was iron. Red sat on his bunk, staring at the wall, untouched food piling at his door. The whispers spread quickly. Some said Red was on a hunger strike, protesting conditions in the SHU. Others claimed he was planning something bigger, a move against the gangs. The guards ignored him as they often did, but the inmates watched closely. By the 4th day, the gangs had noticed too. At lunch, one of the leaders leaned over to Spider. Go talk to Red. Find out why he's not eating. Spider froze. Why me? The leader's smile was thin and sharp. Because you're one of us now. And we need to know if he's making a statement, or planning a problem. Spider's chest tightened. They weren't asking, they were ordering. Refusing meant death. Agreeing meant walking into something dangerous. But what choice did he have? That afternoon, during yard time, Spider approached Red. The old man looked up slowly, his eyes tired but burning with a quiet fire. You haven't eaten, Spider said cautiously. Red smirked. Neither should you. Spider frowned. What's that supposed to mean? It means the food's never safe. Not for you, not for me. They control it, and if you let them control your stomach, they control your soul. The words cut deep. Spider wanted to argue, but Red's gaze was steady, unwavering. You think eating with them makes you safe? It doesn't. It just paints a target on your back. They'll use you until you're empty, then toss you aside like yesterday's tray. Spider swallowed hard. Then what do I do? Red leaned closer, his voice low. Starve with me. Show them you won't bend. That's the only power we've got left. Spider's stomach twisted. He thought of the lieutenant's words, talk or starve. Now Red was offering the same choice but from the opposite side. Two different enemies, one cruel decision. The next day Spider made his move. When his tray slid through the slot, he pushed it back out, untouched. The guards raised their brows but said nothing. Across the block, Red nodded slightly, a small sign of approval. By dinner word had spread. Spider was refusing food again. The gangs noticed immediately. Their leader stormed past his cell, glaring through the bars. What do you think you're doing, Spider? We said eat. Spider stayed silent, his heart hammering. The leader's smile was gone now, replaced by cold fury. You don't eat, you don't live. Remember that. That night, Spider lay on his bunk, hunger gnawing at him like an animal. He tried to focus on Red's words, on the idea of resistance, of freedom. But as his stomach twisted and his body weakened, doubt crept in. Could he survive this? Or was he signing his own death warrant? The answer came the next morning. During chow, as trays were passed out, an inmate at the far end suddenly collapsed. He convulsed violently, foam spilling from his lips, just like the man before. Chaos erupted. Guards rushed in, dragging the man out, inmates shouting over each other. Spider's blood ran cold. The poison was back. And this time everyone wanted to know who was behind it and who would be next. The block was chaos. Guards shouted orders, the blare of alarms echoed, and inmates pounded their fists against the bars. The man who collapsed was dragged out on a stretcher, his body twitching, his face pale as chalk. Everyone saw it. Everyone knew what it meant. The poison wasn't just a rumor anymore, it was real and it had returned. Spider stood at the bars of his cell, his stomach twisted in knots. He hadn't eaten in 2 days and now, watching another man convulse from the food, he almost felt lucky. But luck in Pelican Bay never lasted long. Already the whispers were spreading. Some said the poison was payback from the guards, punishing the gangs for the recent fights. Others swore it was the gangs themselves testing loyalty, sending warnings. And a few, the ones who had nothing left to lose, muttered Spider's name. By evening the gangs had decided. A folded note slid under Spider's door. The handwriting was blocky, rushed. You find out who did this or you take the blame. Spider sat frozen on his bunk. They were pinning it on him. If he didn't deliver answers, they'd mark him as the traitor, the poisoner. And in Pelican Bay that meant a death sentence. He thought about Red, the old man refusing his meals. Was he behind it? Or was he just another pawn, pushing Spider toward starvation and rebellion? The gangs didn't care about truth. They cared about control. And now Spider was caught in the middle, a man with nothing to offer except his word, which meant nothing here. The next day during yard time, Spider sought Red out again. The old man was sitting against the wall, his hands folded, his frame gaunt from hunger. Spider knelt beside him. They think it's me, he whispered. Red's eyes flicked toward him, calm but sharp. Of course they do. That's how this place works. Blame keeps the machine running. Spider clenched his fists. If I don't find the truth, they'll kill me. Red leaned closer, his voice low enough that only Spider could hear. Then you stop playing their game. You don't find the truth for them. You find it for yourself. And when you do, you make them choke on it. Spider stared at him, unsure if it was wisdom or madness. But before he could ask more, a guard barked orders and shoved them apart, the yard time ending. Back in his cell, Spider thought about Red's words. Find it for yourself. But how? The gangs controlled the trades, the guards controlled the meals, and the inmates controlled the rumors. He had no allies, no power, no way to dig deeper. That night, as the block quieted, Spider heard a scrape at his door. Something slid under it, a small folded piece of paper. He unfolded it with trembling fingers. Meet in the laundry. Tomorrow. No signature. No hint of who had sent it. Just the order. Spider didn't sleep that night. His mind raced with possibilities. Was it a trap? A setup from the gangs? A test from the guards? Or was it the poisoner himself calling him out? The next morning he was assigned to laundry duty, his heart pounding as he followed the line of inmates down the corridor. The laundry room was hot, the air thick with steam, machines rattling like old bones. Inmates sorted piles of uniforms under the eyes of 2 distracted guards. Spider worked silently, waiting until a man brushed past him and whispered, "Back corner. Now." Spider's hands trembled as he slipped away, moving to the shadows near the industrial dryers. The man was already there, a thin inmate with sharp features and restless eyes. He leaned close, speaking fast. It ain't the gangs. It ain't the guards. It's one man working alone. Spider's breath caught. Who? The man's eyes darted around before he whispered, They call him Ghost. He's been slipping poison into trays for months. Testing it. Perfecting it. No one knows why. Some say revenge. Some say he's just crazy. But he's real. And if they think you're him, you're done. Before Spider could ask more, the guards shouted, Back to work. The man melted into the line, leaving Spider with more questions than answers. Ghost. A name whispered in the shadows, blamed for the glass, the cyanide, the deaths. If he was real, then Spider wasn't just a target. He was the fall guy. The perfect scapegoat. That evening, Spider returned to his cell, his head pounding. He thought about Ghost, about the gangs, about Red. Every bite of food in Pelican Bay was a gamble, every tray a loaded gun. And now, with the gangs demanding answers, he had only one path left: find Ghost before Ghost found him. But the next morning, before he could act, a new message appeared under his door. We know you're looking. Stop now, or the next tray is your last. Spider's blood ran cold. Someone was watching him, someone who knew. And the warning was clear: keep digging and he'd end up like the others, foaming at the mouth, convulsing on the floor, carried out on a stretcher. But Spider wasn't ready to give up. He had to know the truth. He had to survive. And so, even as fear gnawed at his gut, Spider made his decision. He would keep digging. He would find Ghost. Because in Pelican Bay, the only way to stay alive was to uncover the darkest secrets hiding in the food trays sliding through those steel doors. The warning note burned in Spider's hands. Stop now, or the next tray is your last. His eyes scanned every shadow in the block, every movement, every whisper. Ghost was out there, someone clever enough to slip poison into trays right under the guards' noses, someone invisible enough that no one could pin him down. If Spider stopped digging, the gangs would kill him for silence. If he kept digging, Ghost would kill him for knowing too much. Either way, he was cornered. That night, Spider sat on his bunk, staring at the cold tray in front of him. Beans again. Bread again. The same cycle, the same threat. Hunger gnawed at him, but fear weighed heavier. He pushed the tray aside. He wasn't touching it. Not tonight. Across the hall, Red's raspy voice drifted through the silence. You've seen it now, haven't you? The truth. Spider leaned closer to the bars. The truth is I'm a dead man, Red. They want me gone, Ghost, the gangs, even the guards. Red chuckled, dry as dust. That's the truth of Pelican Bay. Nobody survives by standing in the middle. You either bend to the gangs or you burn with the rebels. You've been dancing on the line too long, Spider. Now the line's burning beneath your feet. Spider clenched his fists. Then what do I do? The old man's voice hardened. You expose him. Ghost. You drag him into the light before he drags you into the grave. The words settled heavy in Spider's chest. Expose Ghost. But how? He had no allies, no proof, no power. Just hunger, fear, and time running out. The answer came the next day, not from Red, not from the gangs, but from the food itself. During lunch in the chow hall, Spider noticed something strange. The trays weren't passed out randomly. The same inmate always sat near the food line, always reaching for trays before anyone else could grab them. He would lift the lid, glance inside, then quietly pass it along to the others. At first it looked like nothing. Just an inmate checking his meal. But then Spider realized he wasn't checking for portion sizes or bruised fruit. He was checking to see which tray had been touched. Which one carried the danger. Spider's stomach knotted. Could it be him? Could this man be Ghost? He watched closer, studying every move. The man was thin, wiry, with restless eyes that darted around like a hunted animal. When the guards looked away, his fingers brushed the trays too long, too deliberate. And when a tray disappeared into another inmate's hands, Spider swore he saw the faintest smile flicker across his face. That night, Spider wrote another note and slid it under the door to the gang leader. I found him. Meet me in the yard. The following afternoon, the yard buzzed with tension. Spider stood by the fence, heart hammering, as the leader approached with 2 lieutenants. You better not be wasting my time, the leader growled. Spider swallowed hard. Ghost. He's the one checking trays. He's the one slipping poison in. The leader's eyes narrowed. He didn't speak, just turned and gave a subtle nod. Within seconds, half a dozen gang members fanned out across the yard. Their eyes locked on the wiry inmate sitting alone on a bench. Ghost. The attack was silent at first, then sudden. The gang swarmed him, fists and shanks flashing. Ghost screamed, his thin body buckling under the blows. Guards shouted, alarms blared, the yard erupted. Spider watched as Ghost's body crumpled to the ground, blood pooling beneath him. The guards rushed in with batons and pepper spray, dragging bodies apart, dragging Ghost away. When the chaos cleared, the leader walked past Spider, his eyes sharp as knives. "You did good," he said quietly. "But don't think this makes you free. You eat with us, you live with us. Remember that." Spider nodded, his stomach heavy. He had saved himself, for now. But the price was clear. He was bound to them forever, his survival chained to their power. That night, as Spider lay on his bunk, the silence felt heavier than ever. Red's voice drifted through the darkness again. "So you found him. And now, do you feel safer?" Spider didn't answer. His throat was dry, his stomach hollow. He thought about Ghost's lifeless eyes, about the gang's cold control, about the endless cycle of food and fear. He realized then that safety was an illusion in Pelican Bay. Food would always be power. And as long as trays slid through those steel doors, men would fight, starve, or die for them. Spider closed his eyes, his body sinking into the thin mattress. Tomorrow another tray would come. Another test. Another gamble. Eating behind bars was never just eating. It was survival, and survival always had a price. The clang of doors echoed down the hall, the sound of Pelican Bay's endless machine grinding on. Spider whispered to himself, almost a prayer, almost a curse. One meal at a time. And in that moment he knew the truth, he hadn't escaped Ghost. He had only inherited his shadow.